The disappearance of a man in Essex are again urging people to come forward with information. 41-year-old Paul Duckenfield hasn't been seen since he flew into Stansted Airport last year. Officers are convinced he's been murdered, even though no body has been found. Felicity Simper reports.
Paul Duckenfield was living with his wife and 2 children in Portugal. This is one of the last times he was captured on CCTV, arriving at Stansted Airport. It was a year ago today he flew into Essex. He hasn't been seen since. Essex police are convinced he's been murdered. His disappearance has sparked a nationwide inquiry, and a year on, they're still trying to find his body.
From arriving in Stansted, we know that he met up with a friend and he went to a restaurant in the Great Sailing area of Essex. And about 8 o'clock we've got CCTV which proves that he was there. But that's the last sighting that we've got of Paul. And since perhaps the 16th, the early hours of the 16th, we've got no contact with him whatsoever from that moment onwards.
Paul Duckenfield's wife, Tracy, has said we all miss Paul greatly and are finding it hard to come to terms with the fact that he has gone. He was a loving husband and father, and I appeal for anyone who has any information to pass it on to the police. We just need to know what happened to him so that we can have some form of closure. The police say Paul Duckenfield was known to be involved with the supply of anabolic steroids used by athletes and bodybuilders, and they think it's this that's something to do with the motive for his murder.
Well, we're convinced that there are people out there still to come forward that may be involved in the distribution of steroids themselves. This is a murder inquiry. It's not so much about the drugs, it's to establish what happened to Paul.
A 47-year-old North Essex man was arrested last year on suspicion of murder. He remains on police bail. Felicity Simper, BBC Look East.
A mother from Ely sent a strange text message to a friend 2 days before she stabbed her 2 daughters to death. A friend of Raker, Kamari Baker, told Cambridge Crown Court she was acting oddly and had wanted to end their friendship. Mrs Kamari Baker denies murder.
Business leaders are asking Lord Mandelson to help break the deadlock over plans for a multi-million-pound winter sports complex near Ipswich. It comes after a warning from the developers behind the scheme that it could be in jeopardy because of problems with red tape.
This is the vision, a huge development costing £300 million. The government gave the nod in November, and back then it seemed all systems go.
This is absolutely ideal for Suffolk. It's going to put it on the world map. It's going to bring a huge number of visitors here.
But 10 months on, overwhelming fervour has given way to overwhelming frustration. The sticking point still the small print, dictating that no work can start until all aspects of the design and construction have been fully approved. The developers say that could take another 2 years, and with 3,500 jobs promised, any further delay is worrying business leaders.
The developers have spent a huge amount of money in bringing this scheme forward. It has planning permission, the scheme is ready to go, has a development value of something in the order of £300 million, a fantastic investment for our region, and we really want to make sure that that happens.
Other supporters are lobbying Lord Mandelson, the business secretary, to help clear the way, but that's something which unsettles opponents of the scheme, who believe vital safeguards could be lost.
The local input disappears when national government puts its all in. And from our point of view, they don't know in Suffolk, they don't know the whole area, what the impact of withdrawing certain planning conditions could be.
The government is planning to change the law in October to allow local planners to waive specific conditions to kickstart schemes which have stalled. The Snoasis team said tonight they're pinning their hopes firmly on that. Kevin Birch, BBC Look East in Suffolk.
Suffolk County Council has spent more than £200,000 in 18 months paying off unwanted staff. The payments were made to sacked employees who in return agreed not to go to an employment tribunal. The council says it's the cheapest way to handle certain cases. The figure was obtained by the Lib Dems. 2 very overdue library books have finally been returned in Suffolk. The County Library Service has just held a week-long amnesty in conjunction with BBC Radio Suffolk. One book was due back 28 years ago. The other, The Genesis of Modern British Town Planning, should have been returned 34 years ago.
The body of a man has been found near Norwich and the victim may have been murdered. But the police aren't getting involved because the skeleton unearthed by archaeologists at Caistor and Edmund was buried in the 4th century AD.
Found found in a shallow grave, and after the Roman was brought out of the ground on Saturday, archaeologists are treating the death as suspicious.
It was a pit that wasn't even dug for him, it was dug for something else. He was crammed in and he would have barely been covered up by the soil. Probably his right foot would have been about 3 inches below the soil, so possibly buried in quite a hurry.
His final resting place was outside the walled Roman town at Caistor, St Edmund. The nature of his burial says a lot about him.
It tells you that he was someone who was probably on the fringes of society, someone who was perhaps a criminal, or perhaps perceived as different in some way.
For the whole of the Roman period, there are only just over 200 recorded Roman burials, which is really quite remarkable, because obviously there's quite a high population, there's relatively a low age of death.
There'll be a dig here every summer for the next 4 years, but it'll take the team at least 10 years to understand what was here, how people lived and died here, and why, after Roman times, everybody disappeared.
For archaeologists who spend most of their time on their hands and knees, this was an amazing find to add to their body of data. And Jana Gadgill for BBC Look East in Caistor, St Edmund.
Night about how Bedford was hoping to make political history by using an American-style meeting to pick a Conservative candidate for mayor. It's only the second time the method's been used in this region.
Anyone who lives in the town was invited to take part in the vote, but so many people turned up, the meeting began in chaos.
They were hoping for a good turnout, but nothing like this. The queue stretched out of the hall, down the corridor and out into the car park as people waited for more than an hour to register. Many of them not even party members, but ordinary voters who like the idea of being given a say in choosing a candidate.
I think it's a fantastic idea, and it shows that it's free speech for everybody at the end of the day.
It's democracy, isn't it? Why not? Why should it be done behind closed doors?
They'd only been expecting 300 people. Extra seating had to be hastily found. The party chairman held an impromptu question and answer session to keep the audience happy, while party staff struggled to check that everyone who had turned up was entitled to vote. Sometime later, the candidate was chosen, Parvez Akbar, a former chairman of the Conservative Association. He hadn't been the favourite to win. If the party membership had only voted, it would probably have been a different result.
I think the day in which parties choose their candidate behind closed doors are long gone. After all, it is the electorate that decide, and our membership gets the advantage of seeing non-Conservatives turn up to vote.
Certainly, very few selection contests normally achieve such a high turnout. The Conservatives are experimenting with open primaries, as they're called, to see if they encourage more people to be interested in politics. On the evidence of tonight, they do, but the party has to be better prepared to cope with the numbers. Andrew Sinclair, BBC Look East, Bedford.
In football, it was an important night last night for the MK Dons and an important night tonight for Ipswich Town and manager Roy Keane.
Ipswich are still looking